their ability to reproduce, which is what happens when you've got such a huge sector of young African men locked up in prison, you know, who it impacts on the reproduction of ourselves as a people. So we are a dispersed nation, and our objective is to make revolution to liberate ourselves as a nation, and that's what the resistance is all about. And then the point I want to make before closing is that this is not purely an abstract theoretical question. It is something that we know is real because of what we saw with the Garvey movement. We saw that, you know, like Garvey had an incredible movement that united African people all around the world. Not in some kind of fraternal kind of relationships where people just networked with each other, but as a part of a common project under the slogan, Africa for African, those at home and those abroad, that did not only involve Africans on the continent of Africa and throughout the Caribbean. Garvey came here from Jamaica. He didn't say Jamaica for the Jamaicans. Garvey came here from Jamaica and built this incredible organization based on the unity of African people around the world. It wasn't a theoretical question he tried. It was a practical problem that he initiated a struggle to try and resolve. And African people around the world saluted and greeted this thing. It was Africans around the world who in 1919 and 20 put them pennies and dimes and things together and bought a steamship line where more than 100,000 African people came to New York to see the launching of a ship of the Black Star Line that was created by Marcus Garvey. We're not talking about some fanciful thing that was out there. We're talking about concretely, this is what happened. And to destroy that, they had to destroy Garvey, destroy that movement, because that was where Africans around the world were going, and not just Africans on the continent, in the Caribbean and here, but black people in India and Australia were also a part of that movement. So the national question that we are talking about is not some abstract question. We're talking about building a political movement that is informed by the contradictions that we face as a dispersed nation all around the world. And that's when we talk about the right to resist. We're talking about building a movement where resistance is consistent and normal. And resistance is consistent right now, but it doesn't have the kind of leadership we need. That's why, you know, African young people in particular in a constant state of resistance all the time, not just every now and then, all the time. That's why African young people wear their clothes the way they wear them. If the white man said, do it this way, wear your pants this way, we'll wear them this way. Nobody had a meeting. No meeting happened among African people and say, hey, let's wear our pants like this. If the white man says you're supposed to wear your hat this way, let's wear the hat that way. Anything that has been defined as the norm, the African young people resisted and go against all of that. All the time they're doing it. Don't do anything in school, anywhere else that the system says you're supposed to do. They're in a constant state of resistance. And the responsibility of the revolution is to harness that resistance, give it direction, give it ideology, give it organization, and let it go. And make this a contest with our oppressor. And I want to say that this resistance among African people is going to grow in strength, depth, and it's going to utilize all means possible. It is not going to be a resistance that's nice and pretty and pleasant, etc. It will use all forms, just like resistance any place in the world, because what is going up against is not nice and pleasant. And it will employ all kinds of weapons. And the fact is, even if we look at what imperialism is doing to young people, and particularly young African men in this country, it is creating the soldiers that's going to be necessary to bring it down. That's exactly what it's doing. The attitude, character that these young Africans have, they just don't have organization, ideological understanding, etc., to do something with it. But that's exactly what the system is doing. It's producing its grave diggers throughout this country, in the prisons, in the schools, on the streets. You got people who don't even know exactly what they're doing, but they are practicing digging the grave of imperialism, and we want to really begin to start passing out shovels to facilitate this process, and that's what this whole resistance has to be about. So let's come to the convention, and I want to mention one other thing, because that's what I am trying to do, is to make resistance the norm, and conscious resistance the norm, and recognize as for what it is, resistance. So even in March 26, just a couple of months from now, the Black is Back Coalition will be conducting a national conference in D.C., a national conference on the other wars. That's how we characterize it, a national conference on the other wars. Because we are tired of a white left and an anti-war movement that has defined war as something that impacts or has implications just for white people, either in the future or right now, or as something that they can use to build their organizations, etc. Because Afghanistan is terrible, and what is happening in Pakistan is terrible, and Palestine and all these places. And these are struggles that you cannot duck, you cannot get away. They're in the public view, and U.S. soldiers and servants of U.S. imperialism, like the illegitimate white settler state of Israel, stand to have people lose their lives, and it has ominous portent that is obvious to many people that makes the getting in on stopping that war of some significance. But the real wars are the other wars. The real wars upon which the whole imperialism rests are the other wars. The real wars are the wars in Congo, where since something like 98, since 1998, you've had maybe 7 million people killed. The real wars are in Haiti, that made the earthquake disaster as significant as it was, that created the conditions of poverty and the miseration of the people. The real wars are at the borders, where they have several different kind of military agencies just to deal with Mexican people who they kill on a regular basis out there. The real wars in Philadelphia and in the African communities here and throughout this country, and those are the wars that we are going to force people to have to deal with. They can say, we don't want to have anything to do with it. That's all right too. Because there was not a single white peace organization, anti-war organization that came with us to Washington, D.C. on November 13th. Then not one showed up as an organization on November 13th, because we have begun to challenge the definition of what they call peace and what they call war. Because we are not just for peace. We are not interested in an imperialist peace. We are not interested in the kind of peace that happens on the plantations just because the slaves are not rising up. We are not interested in the kind of peace that George Bush was looking for. Bush was for peace too. Obama is for peace too. They just want the people to stop resisting, stop struggle. That's the kind of peace. And that's the kind of peace that the peace movement is involved in. We say that to talk about peace in the world, the way the world is constructed today, is to talk about victory for the struggles of the oppressed peoples. It's not just talking about some abstract kind of peace. So we are creating a situation on March 26th where we're inviting people to come. We're having somebody to come to talk about the wars that's happening in Africa that U.S. imperialism is involved in. To talk about what's happening at the Mexican borders, where U.S. imperialism is involved. To talk about what's happening in Haiti and the historical and ongoing role of the U.S. involved in that situation. These are the kinds of things that we're going to put on the table. Also, the objective is not just to put them there, but to grow the resistance and demand that this left, that this peace movement, that this anti-war movement recognize these other wars, and therefore the righteousness of the resistance that is forthcoming. Uhuru. Uhuru.
another round of applause for that presentation. Uhuru! Uhuru! Freedom! Uhuru! Freedom! One Africa! One nation! One nation! One Africa! Uhuru! So we're going to move forward with the program into the discussion, Q&A portion. Before we do that, we have a tradition in the African People's Solidarity Committee of calling for donations at all of our events, because we believe that it's not just a matter of having solidarity in speech, but really material solidarity in action and in turning over the resources that we have available to us from our communities to this work of the Uhuru movement, the African People's Socialist Party. So we want to make that call tonight, and Jesse's going to come around with the basket. And I just want to let people know again, you can join the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. It's $10 for students, $25 for non-students. And anyone that donates tonight can also get one of these buttons that says that you took a stand in support of African liberation and other oppressed people around the world. And those are in the basket as well. And, you know, just while it's going around, I was thinking earlier today about, you know, my job that I have, and the fact that over 50% of African youth are unemployed, probably more. I mean, you can't find those kind of statistics. But if each of us tonight thought about even the last hour that we spent at the last day of our job,